Have you ever, wondered why the child prodigy, you know, the kid who just bruised through third grade, who everyone basically said was a certified genius,
Well,
why they suddenly just fizzle out by high school?
oh yeah, like they just hit a wall. And meanwhile, the totally average kid in the back row, the one who struggled through long division, they go on to build this massive company or,
Oh,
I don't know, change the world.
right. We see it all the time. And usually we just shrug it off and say, well, they peaked early, or, oh, they're just a late bloomer.
Yeah, but the answer is actually far more systematic than that. It lies almost entirely in how those two different kids view, like, a simple puzzle.
Exactly. And if you are joining us for the first time, welcome to the Book Nook. We are a community dedicated to exploring the most impactful and transformative books in self-help, spirituality, psychology, and personal growth.
And today, we are doing a deep dive into a piece of work that fundamentally, like, dismantled how modern psychology understands human potential.
Yeah, we're talking about Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck, PhD. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore how a single foundational belief about your own abilities essentially dictates your personality, your resilience, and, well, your ultimate trajectory.
Because Dweck's research, it stems from this very rich tradition in psychology that looks at the sheer, raw power of belief. And, I mean, we aren't talking about belief in a mystical sense here.
Right, no, not at all.
We are talking about the cognitive framework through which you process, like every single piece of friction in your life.
Yeah.
If you change the simplest, most deeply held assumptions about yourself, you literally alter the neurochemistry of how your brain reacts to a challenge.
It's wild. Let's actually start right there at the foundation with how Dweck even stumbled onto this in the first place.
Yeah, let's do it.
So she was this young researcher, and she was completely obsessed with understanding how people cope with failure. Like, she really wanted to know the mechanics of it.
Right, the actual nuts and bolts of failing.
Exactly. So she set up this fairly straightforward observation. She brought 10-year-old students into a room, made them comfortable, and gave them a series of puzzles.
And the first few were simple, right?
Right, but the subsequent ones were significantly, almost unfairly harder.
Yeah, and her baseline assumption was that she would observe variations in coping mechanisms. She thought she'd see kids who, managed their frustration well, and then kids who just threw tantrums.
Because she operated under the prevailing logic of the time, which was basically you either cope with failure or you don't.
Exactly. But what she actually witnessed completely broke her paradigm.
It really did. Because when confronted with the impossible puzzles, one 10-year-old boy, he pulls up his chair, rubs his hands together, smacks his lips, and literally shouts, I love a challenge.
I mean, can you imagine?
No.
Oh.
And then another kid who is just sweating away at a puzzle he clearly couldn't solve, he looks up with this incredibly pleased expression and says, I was hoping this would be informative.
Dweck famously wondered if she was observing alien children. Like it had never even occurred to her as a trained psychologist that someone could actively save her failure.
Right.
But these 10-year-olds understood a cognitive loophole that she didn't. They didn't view their struggle as failure.
The concept of failing wasn't even active in their brains.
No, to them, the friction of the hard puzzle was simply the physical sensation of learning.
Which brings us to the core aha moment of this entire deep dive. The two mindsets.
Right.
The first is what Dweck coined, the fixed mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe that your human qualities, your intelligence, your personality, your moral character, your athletic ability are essentially carved in stone.
Yeah, you were dealt a hand at birth, and that is your permanent inventory.
Exactly. And the psychological burden of that belief is absolutely crushing when you really analyze it.
Oh, it's exhausting. If you believe you only possess a finite, unchangeable amount of intelligence, then every single interaction becomes a high-stakes test of that intelligence.
You just live with this relentless, gnawing urgency to prove yourself over and over again.
Because if you fail, like if you look foolish or answer a question wrong or struggle with a project, it doesn't mean you lack a specific skill. It means you lack inherent intelligence.
Right. The fixed mindset turns every setback into an indictment of your fundamental worth.
And in stark contrast, we have the growth mindset. This is the belief that your basic qualities are just the starting point.
Right. They are things you can cultivate and expand through effort, through strategy, and through collaboration.
And to be clear, people with a growth mindset aren't delusional. Like they don't believe that anyone can magically become Einstein or Serena Williams just by, trying hard.
No, no, they recognize that raw talent differs. But they also recognize that true potential is unknown and unknowable.
Exactly. It is physically impossible to foresee what years of passion, toil, and targeted training can actually accomplish. The hand you are dealt is just the raw material.
So the kids licking their lips at the impossible puzzle. Classic growth mindset. But if you're listening to this on your commute right now, you might be thinking, okay, sure, kids in a lab are one thing, but what happens when the stakes are real?
Right, like real-world consequences.
Yeah, and that leads us to the University of Hong Kong study, which is where the real-world consequences of these mindsets become just undeniable.
Oh, this study is so fascinating. So the University of Hong Kong is a highly prestigious institution, and crucially, all classes, textbooks, and exams are in English.
Right.
However, many incoming freshmen are not fluent in English when they arrive, which is, an existential threat to their academic survival.
Obviously, if you don't know the language, you can't pass the classes.
Right. So researchers offered a targeted remedial English course to these incoming students to sort of bridge the gap. It was a total lifeline.
But before offering the course, the researchers measured the students' mindsets.
And the students who leaned toward the growth mindset enthusiastically signed up. They recognized a gap in their abilities and seized the tool provided to close it.
Makes sense. But the students identified with a fixed mindset. They overwhelmingly declined the offer.
Which is just, let's unpack the tragic irony of that choice.
It's crazy.
These students were willing to risk their entire college careers, literally flunking out of a world-class university, simply to avoid exposing a deficiency.
Because in the fixed mindset, walking into a remedial class is a public declaration that you are defective.
Exactly. In the short term, their brains calculated that it felt safer to pretend they didn't need help than to endure the ego blow of admitting they had something to learn.
They would literally rather fail out of college in secret than look dumb in public for a few weeks. That is how powerful this cognitive distortion is.
It really is.
And the most terrifying part is that this isn't just behavioral posturing. Like, you can look at the physical topography of the brain and see it happening.
Oh, the Columbia study.
Yes. Columbia University did this EEG study where they hooked people up to brainwave monitors and asked them exceptionally difficult trivia questions.
And the neurological divergence here is just, it's fascinating. For the subjects with a fixed mindset, their brains only showed significant electrical activity when they were being told whether their initial answer was right or wrong.
Right, they're entirely focused on the validation.
Exactly. But when the researchers subsequently presented the actual correct answer, the information that could help them learn for the future, the brain waves of the fixed mindset individuals went completely flat, zero interest.
Wow, because to the fixed mindset brain, the correct answer is a threat. If you didn't know it already, the correct answer is just glowing neon proof of your inadequacy.
Yeah, so the brain literally powers down its learning centers to protect the ego.
That is insane.
But the people with the growth mindset, their brains lit up like Christmas trees when presented with the correct answer.
It didn't care if they got it wrong initially.
Not at all. Their cognitive resources were entirely mobilized to absorb the new information so they could stretch their knowledge base.
And when we view this through a historical lens, it forces a massive reevaluation of how society has weaponized concepts like IQ.
Oh, totally. We've been culturally conditioned to view an IQ score as this, permanent barcode stamped on our foreheads.
Right. But Alfred Binet, the French psychologist, who actually invented the IQ test in the early 20th century, he designed it for the exact opposite purpose.
Wait, I really want to linger on this because it completely contradicts everything we were taught in school. Binet didn't create the IQ test to rank children by permanent intelligence.
Not at all. He designed it in Paris to identify children in the public school system who were falling behind, specifically so the schools could intervene with targeted educational methods.
Oh, well.
It was a diagnostic tool for growth, not a sorting hat for fixed intelligence. Binet himself wrote passionately against what he called the brutal pessimism of philosophers who claimed intelligence was a fixed quantity.
That is so wild.
Yeah, he believed wholeheartedly that through practice, training, and method, we could actually increase our capacity to learn.
I try to visualize this difference, and I keep coming back to a specific analogy for you guys. Living with a fixed mindset is like treating yourself as a finished, framed photograph.
Okay, I like this.
You are hung up in a gallery, and your only job in life is to look perfect. You are terrified of anyone bumping into you or scratching the glass or judging the lighting. You spend all your energy protecting the frame.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But the
Yeah.
growth mindset is like being a wet block of clay on a potter's wheel. You are constantly spinning, always in a state of becoming.
Right, you expect the water to splash.
Yeah, you expect to get pressed out of shape because that friction is the literal mechanism that turns you into a functional vessel.
The distinction between the framed photo and the clay is perfect, primarily because it highlights the role of friction.
Exactly.
Because when things are going perfectly, when the photo is safely on the wall, both mindsets feel great. The divergence happens under pressure. These mindsets fundamentally alter the very definitions of failure and effort.
So true. Let's break that down. In the fixed mindset, failure is no longer an action. It's not a verb. It becomes an identity.
Right. It shifts from, I failed that test, to, I am a failure.
And effort undergoes a similar toxic transformation. If you have a fixed mindset, exerting effort is inherently shameful.
Because the logic dictates that if you possess natural genius, things should come easily to you.
Precisely. Therefore, if you have to sweat, if you have to study for hours, if you have to practice a speech 10 times, it is definitive proof that you are an imposter. Effort is seen as a glaring symptom of a deficiency.
Whereas in the growth mindset, effort is the exact mechanism that ignites ability. It's the fire in the kiln.
Yes.
Let's look at the bad day vignette Dweck used because I think it makes this so tangible. She asks young adults to vividly imagine a terrible cascade of failures kind of day.
Oh, this one is rough.
Yeah. So you get a C+ on a midterm in a class you actually care about. On the walk to your car, you find a parking ticket on the windshield. Frustrated, you call your best friend for some comfort, and they completely brush you off.
I mean, we've all had this exact Tuesday. It's the trifecta of minor misery.
Totally. But observe the psychological reaction. When Dweck asked people with a fixed mindset what they would think and feel in that moment, their internal monologue was apocalyptic.
Yeah, they reported thoughts like, I'm a reject, I'm a total failure, the world is out to get me, and nobody loves me.
Over a C+ and a parking ticket?
I know. They catastrophize because every single event is interpreted as a direct measurement of their overarching worth.
And when Dweck asked how they would cope, the answers were entirely focused on paralysis or deflection.
Right, things like do nothing, stay in bed, binge eat, pick a fight with someone else. Just complete defeat.
Now, when she presented the exact same hypothetical Tuesday to people with a growth mindset, their reactions were entirely operational.
Yeah, they said things like, I need to look at my study habits for that class. I need to be more careful when parking, and I should probably check in on my friend later to see if they're having a bad day.
They didn't enjoy the bad day. They weren't toxic positivity robots. They were upset.
Right, they were bummed out.
But they didn't slap a permanent label on their forehead that said, loser. Their coping mechanism was action. I'll start studying harder for the next test, pay the ticket, and communicate with my friend. They confronted the issues rather than retreating.
And if you want to see what that operational coping mechanism looks like on the most public stage imaginable, look at Jim Marshall.
Oh, this is such a good example.
He was a phenomenal defensive player for the Minnesota Vikings. And in one of the most infamous plays in NFL history, he picked up a fumble and, in the chaos, ran the wrong way.
He scored a safety for the opposing team on national television?
The ultimate public failure.
Seriously. In a fixed mindset, that play ends your psychological career. You hide in the locker room, you blame the lighting, you retire early because the shame of being the guy who ran the wrong way is intolerable.
But Marshall operated in a profound growth mindset. He didn't hide. After the game, he stood in front of the press and owned it entirely.
Which takes so much guts.
It does. But more importantly, he used the immense humiliation of that moment as fuel.
Yeah.
He asked himself how he could use this to become sharper, more focused.
And he went on to play decades of incredible football.
Exactly. Becoming an NFL legend not for the mistake, but for the resilience that followed it. He took a devastating setback and metabolized it into motivation.
We see that same transformative power of effort when we look closely at the story of Seabiscuit.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. We love the movie version of Seabiscuit, but when you look at the historical reality of that horse and its team, it's wild.
Totally wild.
You have a horse whose legs were considered fundamentally broken, the jockey was half blind and too tall, the owner had lost absolutely everything, and the trainer was an obscure, practically destitute horse whisperer.
And if you filter their story through the lens of a fixed mindset, it's actually a depressing narrative.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a story about a bunch of deficient, damaged people and a broken animal who just had to grit their teeth and try really hard to compensate for their lack of natural talent.
Right. But when you apply a growth mindset, the narrative flips entirely. It becomes a testament to the fact that ability is not a fixed commodity. Effort isn't a tax you pay for not being a natural effort, is the alchemy that turns broken parts into a champion.
But here is the problem. Society hates the real Seabiscuit story. We are culturally obsessed with the myth of the natural.
Oh, we love it.
We love the illusion of effortless perfection. We desperately want to believe that Mozart just popped out of the womb dictating symphonies, completely ignoring the fact that his father subjected him to grueling, relentless training from the time he was a toddler.
That myth of the natural is incredibly dangerous because it traps highly capable people into hiding their struggles. They become terrified of being exposed as humans who actually have to sweat.
Yeah, look at the journalism scandals of the 1980s and 90s, with writers like Janet Cook at the Washington Post and Stephen Glass at the New Republic.
Both of them skyrocketed to the top of the journalism world in their 20s. They were universally lauded as whiz kids.
And what happened?
They completely fabricated their biggest stories. Janet Cook literally won a Pulitzer Prize for a story about an 8-year-old heroin addict that she entirely made up.
Because the fixed mindset creates a prison for people labeled as prodigies. Cook and Glass were trapped by their own genius labels.
Right. To do real investigative journalism is grueling. You hit dead ends, you get rejected, you fail constantly.
But if your entire identity is built on being an effortless whiz kid, you cannot admit to your editors that you are struggling to find a source. The ego cannot tolerate the transition from genius to learner.
So, to maintain the illusion of natural brilliance, they resorted to fraud.
Okay, wait, I have to pause and push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
I hear what we are saying about the danger of the natural, but let's be honest about human nature. Isn't it just biologically intuitive to lean toward things that come easily to us?
What do you mean?
Like, if I pick up a guitar and immediately have a knack for it, but I pick up a violin and sound like a dying cat, of course I want to play the guitar. Isn't it incredibly exhausting to treat every single failure, every screech of the violin, as some profound learning opportunity? Doesn't the growth mindset just sound completely tiring?
Well, it sounds tiring if you are still subconsciously carrying the baggage of the fixed mindset, which is the assumption that exertion is inherently miserable.
Okay.
But here is the paradox that Dweck's research uncovered. People who deeply inhabit the growth mindset actually find joy in the exertion itself. The stretch is the reward.
Because they aren't constantly auditing their ego during the process.
Precisely. Take Mia Hamm, arguably one of the greatest female soccer players in history. She didn't coast on the fact that she was naturally more gifted than everyone in her age bracket.
Right, she was a phenomenon.
But she actively sought out exhaustion. She always played up joining the older boys' teams, throwing herself into the most brutal collegiate environments she could find. She noted that she was improving faster than she ever dreamed possible, specifically because she was constantly stretching herself to the absolute limit.
So the exhaustion wasn't a threat.
Right. The joy for her wasn't in stepping onto a field and dominating easily. The joy was in the friction. When you finally start viewing effort as a threat to your identity, the exhaustion stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like exhilaration.
That makes sense internally for the individual.
Yeah.
But what happens when we project this dynamic onto a grand scale?
Yeah.
If the fixed mindset destroys an individual reporter's ethics or an athlete's potential, what does it do when it's sitting at the head of a boardroom table? Let's talk about how mindsets dictate corporate survival.
Oh, this gets so messy. When a fixed mindset occupies the C-suite, it creates a very specific pathology that organizational psychologists often call CEO disease.
Right.
This occurs when a leader, terrified of having their fundamental competence questioned, surrounds themselves entirely with worshipers and systematically exiles any critics.
They demand to be viewed as flawless royalty rather than working executives.
Exactly, and Lee Iacocca is the textbook example of this. Early in his career, he pulled off a massive, brilliant turnaround at Chrysler Motors. He was the hero of American business.
But the moment he achieved that status, he caught a terminal case of CEO disease.
He really did. The turnaround validated his genius, but to maintain that genius status, he stopped taking risks. He refused to innovate.
While Japanese automakers were completely redesigning the concept of the automobile, focusing on fuel efficiency, new manufacturing methods, and consumer needs, Iacocca just kept rolling out the exact same car models with superficial changes.
He was terrified that if he tried a completely new design and it failed, the market would strip him of his genius title. He spent his time appearing on talk shows and obsessing over Chrysler's stock price as a daily measurement of his personal worth.
He lost touch with the actual mechanics of his company because he was too busy building a shrine to his own ego.
Exactly. Now contrast that spectacular stagnation with Lou Gerstner, who was brought in to save IBM in the 1990s.
Oh, Gerstner is fascinating. When he arrived, IBM was suffocating under one of the most toxic, elitist, fixed mindset cultures in corporate America.
It was bad.
The company was essentially a collection of fiefdoms, where executives spent all their time trying to prove they were the smartest person in the room, actively sabotaging other departments to make themselves look better.
And Gerstner, who was a fiercely avowed growth mindset leader, walked in and completely dismantled the hierarchy. He refused to play the genius game.
He focused entirely on cross-departmental teamwork, open communication, and institutional learning.
And Wall Street actually sneered at him during his first few years because he wasn't making flashy, egocentric moves. But while Wall Street was laughing, he was rewiring the company's brain. A few years later, IBM was an absolute juggernaut again.
We see the same pattern with Jack Welch at General Electric. When Welch was a young, ambitious engineer at GE, he made a calculation error that literally caused a chemical explosion, blowing the roof off a GE factory.
Which is, the ultimate bad day at work.
The ultimate. He drove to corporate headquarters absolutely certain he was going to be fired and publicly shamed.
Obviously.
But his boss didn't attack his character or question his intelligence. His boss supported him, sat him down, and asked a growth mindset question. What exactly did you learn from this, and how do we prevent it?
Wow.
That specific moment taught Welch that true self-confidence isn't about projecting invulnerability. True confidence is the courage to be open to catastrophic mistakes, to own them, and to change because of them.
But the business world doesn't always learn that lesson. And that brings us to the most terrifying corporate cautionary tale in modern history.
Enron.
Enron. The journalist Malcolm Gladwell wrote a brilliant autopsy of Enron's collapse, and he traced it back to a philosophy pushed by the consulting firm McKinsey & Company. McKinsey was championing this idea called the talent mindset.
It was essentially the fixed mindset packaged and sold as a corporate strategy. McKinsey believed that a company's success depended entirely on recruiting naturals, people with elite pedigrees, Ivy League degrees, who were innately, dazzlingly brilliant.
And Enron bought into this completely. They structured their entire corporate culture around the worship of raw talent.
They implemented a system called rank and yank, where every year the bottom 15% of performers were fired, and the top performers were given massive bonuses and promoted incredibly fast, regardless of their actual experience.
Which creates a psychological pressure cooker. When an entire corporate culture esteems you solely for your innate brilliance, and your job security depends on maintaining the illusion that you are the smartest person in the room, it becomes structurally impossible to ask for help.
Right. If a mid-level manager at Enron didn't understand a complex energy derivative, they couldn't go to a superior and say, I need someone to explain this to me, because that would expose them as a non-genius.
They'd be ranked at the bottom and yanked out the door.
So what do? When these talented people faced a massive problem or a financial loss they couldn't solve, they couldn't admit it. They would literally rather commit fraud.
They created off-balance sheet entities to hide the losses because their egos and their paychecks could not tolerate the reality of failure.
The entire company collapsed, not because they weren't smart, but because their culture strictly stigmatized effort and learning.
It is staggering to realize that a multi-billion-dollar fraud was essentially bred by a flawed psychological framework. And this isn't just a corporate phenomenon. We see this exact dynamic, the fragility of the natural in elite sports.
Oh, absolutely. The contrast between athletes with fixed versus growth mindsets is almost comical when you lay it out. Let's look at John McEnroe.
Oh, classic.
Arguably one of the most naturally talented tennis players to ever walk onto a court. But he was a textbook fixed mindsetter. He hated to practice, he hated to learn, and most importantly, when he lost, it was never, ever his fault.
Because if it was his fault, it meant his raw talent was deficient, so he developed a masterful ability to deflect blame.
He blamed the sawdust on the court, he blamed the temperature, he blamed the tabloids, he once blamed a loss on the fact that his friend was in love and he wasn't.
Are you kidding me?
I'm serious. He blamed the fact that he ate a heavy meal too close to the match. Anything to protect the core identity of his genius.
Sergio Garcia, the incredible golfer, did the same thing. During a slump, he fired caddy after caddy, There is a famous incident where he hit a terrible shot, and instead of analyzing his swing, he took off his shoe, blamed the shoe for the shot, and threw it, nearly hitting a tournament official.
Wow.
Yeah.
Eh,
In the fixed mindset, taking responsibility is psychological suicide.
But then you pan over to someone like Michael Jordan. Society views Jordan as a mythological god of basketball, the ultimate natural. But Jordan's own narrative is completely different. This is the guy who famously didn't make the varsity team in high school. He wasn't anointed as a prodigy early on.
He had to build himself. And even when he reached the absolute pinnacle of the sport, when he was universally recognized as the greatest, he never stopped working on his weaknesses.
Right. When he realized his physical speed would eventually decline, he spent an entire offseason relentlessly practicing his foul-away jumper to add a new dimension to his game.
Jordan actually found it embarrassing when people worshipped him as a deity. He knew intimately the thousands of hours of grueling, unglamorous work that went into his performance. To him, success wasn't about establishing permanent superiority over everyone else. It was about the continuous process of doing his absolute best and expanding his limits.
And speaking of expanding limits, I think the most moving example of the growth mindset transcending what we even think is physically possible is the story of Christopher Reeve.
Oh, the story's incredible.
After the horse riding accident that severed his spinal cord, leaving him completely paralyzed below the neck, the entire medical community essentially told him to adopt a fixed mindset about his body.
They told him the damage was permanent, the nervous system doesn't regenerate, and he needed to come to terms with his new reality.
The medical consensus was that acceptance was the only path, but Reeve applied a massive, almost defiant growth mindset to his own biology. He refused to believe that his physical baseline was carved in stone.
He initiated a grueling, agonizing exercise program utilizing electrical stimulation to force his paralyzed muscles to move.
And doctors warned him he was in dangerous psychological denial. They thought he was torturing himself for false hope.
But years into this relentless process, against all known medical literature at the time, Reeves started regaining actual movement.
Wait, really?
Yes. He moved his fingers, then his hands, his arms, and eventually regained sensation in his torso and legs. He didn't just stretch his own personal abilities. His refusal to accept a fixed limit fundamentally forced medical science to rethink neuroplasticity and the central nervous system's capacity for recovery.
That story is incredible, but it brings up a really complex question.
Okay, what is it?
We are saying that fixed mindset people avoid effort because it threatens their ego. But if that's true, how do we explain the hyper-competitive toxic workaholic, the CEO who works 80 hours a week and sleeps under their desk? They are expending a massive amount of effort, yet they clearly have a fixed mindset. How does the psychology explain that?
That is a crucial nuance. It's not that fixed mindset individuals are inherently lazy. They will expend massive, even self-destructive amounts of effort, but the underlying motivation is entirely different from someone with a growth mindset.
Okay, so what's the motivation?
A fixed mindset CEO will work 80-hour weeks if the specific goal is to win a Nobel Prize or crush a rival or become a billionaire, because those achievements serve as indisputable public validation of their inherent superiority.
So the effort isn't for the sake of learning. It's a desperate sprint to capture a trophy that proves they are better than everyone else.
Exactly. They are seeking validation on a monumental scale. And you can spot them because even though they work incredibly hard, they remain utterly intolerant of criticism.
Right. They refuse to mentor subordinates because they fear being replaced.
They cannot function in true collaborative teamwork because they have a pathological need to be the only genius in the room. The exertion is there, but the capacity for true vulnerability and self-correction is completely absent.
Wow. Okay, so if this need for validation destroys companies and corrupts sports careers, what happens when that exact same ego, that exact same terror of imperfection comes home at the end of the day?
Oh, this is where it gets really real.
Let's transition from the boardroom to the living room. How do these mindsets dictate our interpersonal, romantic, and social lives?
It turns relationships into an absolute minefield. In the context of love and partnership, Dweck discovered that you can actually hold a fixed mindset about 3 distinct variables. You can have a fixed mindset about yourself, about your partner, and about the relationship itself.
And having a fixed mindset about the relationship breeds what I think is the most destructive cultural trope we have, the fairy tale myth.
Oh, yes.
The core belief is, if you have to work at it, it wasn't meant to be. I always compare a fixed mindset romance to wanting to live exclusively on the final page of a fairy tale.
That's a great way to put it.
They want the happily ever after frozen in amber. They want the magic.
Hmm.
But they absolutely refuse to read the chapters where the couple actually has to learn how to communicate boundaries, compromise on finances, or figure out who unloads the dishwasher.
It is the expectation of instant, perfect, and perpetual compatibility. And the danger is that the moment there is fiction, the moment they have their first real argument about money or time management, the fixed mindset partner panics.
Their internal monologue says, uh-oh, this is hard. This isn't magical anymore. We must not be soulmates.
Right. They interpret the normal friction of two humans merging their lives as a catastrophic sign that the relationship is inherently flawed.
Which leads right into the second trap, the belief that problems indicate deep-seated character flaws.
Yeah.
In a growth mindset, if your partner forgets to pick up the dry cleaning, it's a mistake. It's a communication breakdown. But in a fixed mindset, that same forgotten dry cleaning is weaponized as a permanent character indictment. You forgot the dry cleaning because you are a fundamentally selfish, inconsiderate person.
You are assigning a permanent label to their personality. And the psychological consequence of blaming your partner's core character is that it induces disgust and contempt.
The relationship transforms from a partnership into a courtroom.
Yes. You become a prosecutor, constantly gathering tiny pieces of evidence, the socks on the floor, the tone of voice at dinner, to prove that your partner is deeply, immutably flawed.
And this courtroom mentality completely dictates how people handle breakups. Dweck's research on revenge versus forgiveness is genuinely chilling.
It really is.
When people with a fixed mindset experience being dumped, their primary overriding goal is revenge.
Think about the mechanics of why that is. In a fixed mindset, rejection is not just a painful event, it is a permanent brand. It means the person leaving you has objectively judged you as unlovable and unworthy.
And the ego cannot survive that judgment.
Exactly. So the only way the fixed mindset person can redeem their own worth is by destroying the worth of the person who rejected them. They have to make the other person suffer. One subject in Dweck's study explicitly stated, if I had to choose between me being happy and him being miserable, I would definitely want him to be miserable.
That is so dark.
Yeah.
It's a toxic zero-sum game.
Yeah.
But for people with the growth mindset, the immediate goal after a breakup, even amidst the intense grief and pain, is forgiveness and understanding.
They are deeply hurt, obviously, but they don't internalize the rejection as a permanent stamp of loser.
Right. They process the relationship as an experience that taught them something vital about communication or intimacy or what they actually need in a future partner. They forgive, not because they are saints, but because forgiveness is the only psychological mechanism that allows them to move forward.
And this fundamental difference in what we want from a partner shows up long before the breakup. There was a fascinating study asking young adults to describe their ideal mate.
Well, this is a good one.
The individuals with a fixed mindset essentially wanted a mirror. They wanted a partner who would put them on a pedestal, worship their innate talents, and constantly make them feel flawless.
But the growth mindset people wanted a collaborator. They wanted a partner who would see their faults, lovingly call them out on their blind spots, and actively challenge them to grow. They didn't want to be worshipped, they wanted to be pushed.
This divergence extends beyond romantic love and deeply impacts our basic social interactions, particularly when we look at something like shyness.
The researcher Jennifer Beer conducted a brilliant study on social anxiety and mindsets. She found that shy people exist in equal numbers across both mindsets. The feeling of anxiety is universal,
Okay, that makes sense.
but how they behave when shy is radically different.
This is one of my favorite studies in the book. So the shy, fixed mindset people basically let their anxiety hijack the entire interaction. They walk into a party, they are terrified of being judged or looking foolish, so they freeze up. They act aloof, they avoid eye contact, and they end up appearing cold or unfriendly as a defense mechanism to protect themselves from judgment.
But the shy growth mindset people experience the exact same initial terror. If you watch them for the first 5 minutes of meeting someone new, they look incredibly nervous. But then a cognitive shift happens. Their social skills actually kick in.
Why? Because they suddenly stop viewing the interaction as a performance where they're being graded, and they start viewing it as an opportunity to learn about the other person.
They embrace the awkwardness of the challenge.
Exactly. Within 10 minutes, they're engaging and chatting just like non-shy people. They literally overwrite their anxiety with curiosity.
Which highlights a broader sociological point. The fixed mindset creates an atmosphere of permanent judgment. And nowhere is that atmosphere more toxic and destructive than in the ecosystem of school bullying.
Oh, man. So true.
Stan Davis, a school counselor, developed a highly effective anti-bullying program that is entirely based on dismantling mindset principles.
Because school cultures natively run on a fixed mindset. The implicit rule of the playground is that some kids are naturally superior, the alphas, and they are entitled to brutalize others to maintain that status.
And the victims are branded as permanent misfits, destined to be at the bottom of the food chain forever.
Davis realized that to stop bullying, you cannot just punish the behavior. You have to remove the atmosphere of permanent judgment.
His program works because it explicitly teaches bullies that their worth is not tied to dominance, removing their need to constantly prove their superiority through cruelty.
Right. Simultaneously, it empowers the victims by showing them that the label misfit is a fiction. They are developing human beings, not permanent outcasts.
So if an entire school ecosystem can be poisoned by these beliefs, it begs the ultimate question: how do we all get programmed with this in the first place? How do we arrive in adulthood terrified of failure?
We have to trace this back to the origin point, to childhood, and specifically to the messages that well-meaning parents, teachers, and coaches drill into us.
We need to talk about the absolute booby trap of parenting, the danger of praising intelligence. Parents overwhelmingly believe, studies show over 80%, that the best way to foster confidence in a child is to praise their natural ability. You are so smart. You're a natural. You're a little genius.
It comes from such a place of love, but Dweck's research shows it is basically psychological poison.
It really is.
When a child completes a puzzle or gets an A on a test and the parent says, "Wow, you did that so fast, you are so smart," the parent thinks they're building a shield of confidence. But what the child actually hears is the inverse.
Right. They hear my parents value me because I did this quickly and perfectly. Therefore, if I encounter something that takes a long time or if I struggle, it means I am no longer smart and I lose my value.
You are unintentionally teaching them that their worth is conditional upon effortless perfection. This was proven in what I consider the definitive mic drop moment of Dweck's career, the intelligence praise study.
Oh, this study is legendary. Researchers gave a group of kids a set of moderate problems. Afterward, half the kids were praised for their intelligence. They were told, "Wow, you got a great score. You must be really smart at this."
Okay.
The other half were praised for their process and effort. They were told, "Wow, you got a great score. You must have worked really hard at this."
Just one sentence of difference.
Just one sentence. Then, the researchers gave the kids a choice. They could try a harder task where they might make mistakes but would definitely learn something new, or they could try an easy task, similar to the first one.
Yeah.
The children who had been praised for their intelligence overwhelmingly chose the easy task. They refused the challenge because they had to protect the smart label that had just been handed to them.
But the kids praised for effort. 90% of them chose the harder task. They wanted to keep flexing the effort muscle because that's what was validated.
And it gets darker. The researchers then gave all the children a genuinely difficult task that was designed for them to fail.
Oh.
The kids praised for effort, treated it as a puzzle. But the kids praised for being smart were shattered. Their confidence plummeted. And later, when the researchers asked the children to write down their scores privately to share with students at another school, a staggering number of the smart kids actually lied.
They inflated their scores to protect their image.
Exactly. Just let that sink in. Praising a child's inherent intelligence literally turned them into liars who were terrified of a challenge. That is how quickly the fixed mindset corrupts.
The alternative is simple to understand but hard to execute. Praise the process. You praise the strategy, the focus, the persistence, the willingness to try different angles.
The greatest educators inherently understand this contract of effort. Look at Marva Collins, the legendary Chicago educator who took in students that the public school system had completely written off as unteachable.
She is amazing.
On her first day of class, she approached a second grader named Freddie, who had been held back, labeled a failure, and wanted absolutely no part of learning. She didn't offer him empty praise. She took his face in her hands and said, "You can't just sit in a seat and grow smart. I promise you're going to do and you are going to produce. I am not going to let you fail."
She didn't call him a secret genius. She promised him a grueling, unwavering process of support and hard work. She shifted the focus entirely away from his inherent ability.
Haim Janot, the famous child psychologist, illustrates this beautifully with a story about a 5-year-old boy named Bruce. Bruce walks into his new kindergarten classroom, looks up at the paintings on the wall, and loudly asks, Who made those ugly pictures?
And his mother immediately panics and scolds him, saying, "Bruce, it's not nice to call things ugly."
Because the mother is reacting to the surface behavior. But the kindergarten teacher is listening to the psychological subtext.
What was he really asking?
The teacher understands that Bruce isn't actually being a critic. He is terrified. What Bruce is really asking is, what happens to a boy who doesn't paint well? If I paint an ugly picture, will I be mocked? Will I be judged as a bad kid?
Wow.
So the teacher ignores the rudeness and answers the real question. She looks at Bruce and says, in here, you don't have to paint pretty pictures. You can paint mean pictures if you feel like it.
And Bruce immediately relaxed and smiled. The teacher preemptively removed the fixed mindset judgment from the room. She established that the classroom was a place of expression and process, not a gallery where he would be graded on his inherent talent.
This removal of permanent judgment is also why the growth mindset is the most effective psychological shield against cultural stereotypes. Whether we are talking about stereotypes regarding gender and mathematics or racial prejudices regarding intelligence, a stereotype is essentially a culturally weaponized fixed mindset label.
It is society slapping a permanent badge of inferiority onto a group.
Exactly. But when an individual deeply internalizes a growth mindset, that label loses its adhesive. If you fundamentally believe that your abilities can be expanded through effort and strategy, then a stereotype doesn't define your ceiling. It might define the friction you have to push against, but you don't believe in the permanent inferiority it prescribes.
Okay, wait, I have to interject here because I think a lot of parents listening are having a crisis right now.
Uh-oh.
I'll admit, it feels almost biologically impossible to stop calling a child smart when they do something amazing. It is so deeply ingrained in our cultural vernacular to dish out that specific compliment. When my niece solves a math problem in 3 seconds, my knee-jerk reaction is to gasp and say, "Wow, you're a genius." How do we practically, on a Tuesday afternoon, stop doing that?
It's incredibly difficult
Okay.
because it requires you to actively rewire your own internal dialogue before you speak. You have to pause in that split second and ask yourself, what behavior do I actually want to see repeated tomorrow?
Yeah.
If you just want them to be naturally perfect, say you're a genius. But if you want them to be resilient, when the math gets hard in 3 years, you have to praise the mechanics.
So I have to suppress my enthusiasm.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You keep the exact same high energy,
Yeah.
but you pivot the vocabulary. Instead of you're a genius, you say, wow, you figured out an incredible strategy to solve that so fast. Or, I love how intensely you focus on that puzzle.
Oh, I see.
You are still celebrating them, but you are anchoring their pride to their actionable choices, not their immutable traits.
Which brings us perfectly to the final phase of our deep dive. Knowing that we have all been programmed, to some degree, with this fixed mindset since we were toddlers being praised for being smart, how do we actively rewire ourselves as adults today?
The first, most vital step is understanding the architecture of change. Psychological change is not like surgical extraction. You don't just identify a fixed belief, extract it like a bad tooth, and plop a shiny new growth belief into the empty socket. Beliefs leave neurological scaffolding. The new growth belief has to be built alongside the old one. For a long time, they will coexist. But as you consciously nurture the growth belief, it gradually starves the fixed belief of oxygen and takes over your internal monologue.
That internal monologue is the battleground. The fixed mindset monologue is essentially a court judge sitting inside your head banging a gavel all day. This mistake means I'm a loser. Her promotion means I'm incompetent. This argument means my partner is selfish. It is a constant stream of final verdicts.
The growth mindset monologue, however, fires the judge and hires a coach. It is entirely action-oriented.
How so?
When faced with the exact same setback, say you get passed over for a promotion, the coach asks, what is the data here? What skills am I lacking? Who can I ask for feedback? What strategy should I deploy next quarter?
But shifting from the judge to the coach requires more than just wishing for it. It requires what psychologists call concrete implementation plans. You can't just wake up and say, I'm going to have a growth mindset today. That's a vague wish. Research shows you have to visualize exactly when, where, and how you will execute the new behavior.
You have to literally tell yourself, tomorrow at 8 a.m., when I sit at my desk and feel the urge to avoid that difficult report, I will open it and work on it for 30 minutes before I allow myself to check my email.
Exactly. And Dweck proved how effective this deliberate cognitive rewiring can be with her brainology workshops. They took junior high students, which is the exact developmental window where grades usually plummet because kids start withdrawing effort to protect their fragile egos from the increasing difficulty of the curriculum.
Right. Middle school's where it becomes uncool to try.
Totally. So they brought these kids in and didn't just tell them to try harder, they explicitly taught them the neuroscience of neuroplasticity. They taught them that the brain is literally a muscle that physically grows new connections when challenged.
Just arming them with the biological fact that intelligence is malleable unleashed a tidal wave of effort.
There's the story of Jimmy in that workshop. He was your classic, hardcore, low-effort kid, the one staring out the window, refusing to engage. When the instructors explained how the brain forms new neurons through hard work, Jimmy looked up with tears in his eyes and said, "You mean I don't have to be dumb?"
That breaks your heart and mends it at the same time.
He had accepted his permanent label, but the moment he realized effort was a tool, not a weakness, his entire trajectory changed. He started staying up late to finish assignments early so he could get feedback from his teachers and revise his work. He completely abandoned the fixed mindset armor.
And we have to talk about that armor, because giving it up is terrifying. Changing your mindset requires relinquishing the comfort of the fixed mindset. And make no mistake, it is deeply comfortable.
It is. It feels incredibly safe to retreat into entitlement, the belief that you are inherently superior and the world just doesn't recognize your genius yet. Or to retreat into denial, refusing to acknowledge your flaws.
Dropping that armor means you have to stand in the cold reality that you are ordinary, you are flawed, and you have a massive amount of work to do. It forces you to accept that you are a work in progress.
We see the struggle constantly in the realm of willpower and dieting. A fixed mindset views a diet as a test of sheer, immutable willpower. I am strong, therefore I will not eat the cake.
But willpower is a finite resource. Eventually, they're at a birthday party, they're exhausted, and they eat a piece of cake. In the fixed mindset, that single lapse is a total identity collapse. I ate the cake. That means I am weak. I am a failure. The diet is completely ruined, so I might as well eat the entire cake and start over next year.
Conversely, a person applying a growth mindset to their health treats a diet as a complex learning process. They don't rely on sheer willpower. They plan strategies. They keep trigger foods out of the house, or they pre-plan a cheat meal.
And when the inevitable lapse happens, they do not catastrophize. They don't label themselves a failure. They treat the lapse as crucial data. They ask the coach in their head, okay, what triggered that binge? Was I too hungry before I went to the party? How can I plan better next time?
This sounds incredibly similar to cognitive behavioral therapy. Is mindset work basically just CBT?
They are cousins, but there's a profound philosophical distinction. Cognitive therapy is incredibly effective at helping people make more realistic judgments. It catches you when you catastrophize and stops you from jumping from, I failed a math test, to, I am a worthless human being who will die alone.
Right.
CBT calibrates the judge in your head to be more fair. But mindset change does something more radical. It takes you out of the framework of judgment entirely. It moves you from a world where you are constantly measuring your worth into a world where your worth is a given, and your only focus is on growth, curiosity, and learning.
You aren't just making the courtroom fairer, you are burning the courtroom down.
Yeah.
Okay, here is my final practical question for you. What happens when you inevitably relapse?
Oh, it happens.
Let's say you've been listening to this, you practice the growth mindset for months. You are praising the process, you are embracing challenges at work, you feel great. But then, out of nowhere, a massive shock hits. You are fired from your job, or your partner of 5 years suddenly leaves you. The trauma hits, the amygdala fires, and instantly your brain reverts to the oldest, deepest programming and screams, I am a complete failure. I am unlovable. How do you get back on track when the trauma pulls you under?
That is the most authentic reality of this journey.
Yeah.
You will fall back into the fixed mindset, especially under severe emotional distress. The critical key here is that you cannot have a fixed mindset about having a fixed mindset.
Oh, that's good.
You can't beat yourself up for slipping.
Yeah.
When you hear that old judgmental voice screaming, I'm a failure, you have to consciously, gently invite the growth voice into the room to sit beside it.
How does that sound in practice?
You literally say to yourself, I am in deep pain right now. I feel completely rejected and I feel like a failure. But I know, intellectually, that this single event does not define my permanent traits. What is one microscopic thing I can learn from this today to help me move forward?
So you don't suppress the pain.
No, you don't slap a happy face on a devastating firing or breakup.
Yeah.
You just absolutely refuse to let the event carve a permanent label into your identity.
You put your focus squarely on the process of surviving the day and then the next day and growing through the fracture. As we bring this journey full circle, I think it is blindingly clear why this book is considered monumental. It's not just a manual for struggling students trying to pass algebra.
No, it is a lifeline for CEOs who are suffocating under the weight of their own manufactured infallibility. It's for elite athletes who are terrified of losing their natural status and aging out of their prime. It's for parents who are desperately trying to give their children genuine, bulletproof resilience rather than fragile egos.
And it's for anyone listening right now who feels trapped by the crushing, exhausting pressure to be perfect in an Instagram-filtered world. It is literally a manual for unlocking your latent human potential simply by changing the narrative of the voice inside your own head.
It reminds us with empirical data that our abilities are not a rigid hand we are dealt at birth and forced to play forever. They are muscles, and they are waiting for the friction of a challenge to grow.
Right.
The fixed mindset creates a completely artificial ceiling, built entirely out of the fear of judgment. The growth mindset blows the roof off.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. If your true potential is entirely unknown and unknowable because it is physically impossible to foresee what 10 years of passion, toil, and unwavering training can accomplish, then what artificial ceiling are you currently placing on yourself right now just to feel safe from judgment?
What could you achieve if you finally decided that it is perfectly okay to be a beginner, it is okay to struggle, and it is glorious to grow?
That is the question that changes a life. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into mindset. Be sure to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss an episode. And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one.